and welcome to New Voices in AI, the series where we celebrate the voices of PhD students, early career researchers, and those with a new perspective on AI. I am Jo Daly, Engagement Manager for AIhub, and this time I'm speaking to Lily Xu about some of her work. And without any further ado, let's begin. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today. If you could just introduce yourself, just like who you are, where you are, and a little bit about what you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's great to chat with you, Joe. Thank you so much for reaching out and letting me speak to the AI Hub community. My name is Lily Xu, and I'm a PhD student at Harvard University studying computer science. And all of my work focuses on applications of AI for environmental conservation. So thinking about questions of how to strategically allocate limited resources, which are is always the constraint that we have for sustainability tasks that we're working on. So my primary application area is environmental conservation through poaching prevention. So thinking about how to help rangers in protected areas around the world strategically decide where poaching hotspots might be and how they ought to plan patrols. So this is using machine learning, online learning, and reinforcement learning to try to figure out like where should we be going, where do we need to collect more data from to improve our models, and how do we do sequential decision making and planning in these like changing, uncertain environments.
That's like amazing and super important work. Kind of, there's so much work that needs to be kind of done in the sustainability and like protecting the environment and wildlife and all of that really important stuff. How did you kind of get started in AI? Sorry.
So my path to AI research it was very non-traditional. So I came into grad school straight out of undergrad, where I studied computer science and Spanish. And at that time, there was not really direct research interest that I had. I just thought, oh well, like I really enjoyed the computer science class that I've taken. I feel like this is like my relative strong suit, and I find it really interesting. But I didn't really do much research in undergrad, and I was not even like, oh, I want to do AI 4 years ago, AI was like big, but it's not as dominant as it is today. So that was not like an obvious step or anything. But then when I was trying to look into grad schools and decide what I wanted to spend 4 to 6 years working on, I came across a number of researchers, including my current advisor, who were working on computational challenges to sustainability computational approaches to sustainability challenges. And I just thought that was so inspiring and interesting because I personally believe that environmental sustainability is the most pressing issue of our generation. So uh, I always thought that that was something that I would just like care about in my personal life. You know, I would try to learn about it. I would try to like reduce my personal um, like environmental impact. I would try to like encourage other people like, hey, yeah, like vegetarian food tastes great. Yeah, we can, we don't have to like buy all these things new. We can like try to like move away from car-centric lifestyles and all of that. But then I didn't realize that that was something I could actually use my technical skills for. So I found that really inspiring, and then just decided like I want to like try to make a career out of working on environmental challenges through this computer science lens. And that's how I kind of stumbled into AI because most of the techniques that people were applying there were like using computer vision and optimization, machine learning, and planning and all of that. So I became kind of fortunate that I stumbled into this very hot topic of AI through this kind of back door.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, it's a kind of yeah, they say the phrase of one of the most kind of important challenges for like a generation kind of makes it already very clear kind of the importance of this kind of work. But could you tell us a little bit more about some of the implications of your research and sort of what kind of about it specifically makes it really interesting as an area of study for you?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different challenges in the space of environmental conservation that really highlight to us what are the important gaps in computer science that we need to fill. And as everyone in this AI Hub community probably knows, that AI has really been developed and implemented and deployed and been a revolution for a lot of digital spaces. So it's really revolutionized Silicon Valley, like some large fraction of like the Fortune 500 companies claim to be using AI in some ways. A lot of the big tech companies are really making like a lot of their profits in advertising and whatnot through AI. But the there's a huge like cavern between the AI that has been developed for Silicon Valley and what AI can do for these kind of real world physical problems because we in these real world challenges such as environmental conservation, we don't have all of the resources that we have in these digital spaces. So we don't have access to, a billion users that we can collect data from. We don't have very fast timestamps steps in which we want to say, okay, well, we're Netflix and we're trying to figure out whether or not an audience would like this movie or not. So let's just show it to 1,000 people, and then we'll see in 10 minutes whether or not they click on those movies. So they are able to collect information really, really quickly. They're able to iterate and deploy. There's sort of no bottleneck from that perspective. Whereas in on the ground challenges, if we want to collect more data for to understand what poaching patterns are like, we have to um, wait for a call with a ranger manager. We have to talk to them saying, "Hey, like this is an area where we want to go." Send them GPS coordinates. They have to wait until the next ranger planning meeting, which only happens once a month on the 11th of the month in Cambodia, for example, in Shupavi Sanctuary. And then after the 11th of that month, when they plan, okay, this is where we're going to go on patrol, then they'll go on 4-day long patrols at a time. It'll take another 3 weeks before the data gets uploaded, and then it takes another however long for them to send us that data. So the process of like collecting and updating things is very, very slow. So we for these really pressing real world challenges, we don't have the luxury of really short timestamps. We don't have the luxury of a lot of data. So what I think there's a lot of room for and research interest in is to figure out what are the barriers in between the AI techniques that we've developed and how do we adapt those mechanisms and those algorithms to work in these low data settings and these like short time scale, short horizon environments where we have a lot of uncertainty. There's also some biases in the data. There's changing like non-stationarity in the environment. There's maybe some sort of like exogenous factors that we aren't able to account for. How do we actually come close to like understanding what this environment space even looks like, and then what do we need to care about, and what flexibility we have that we like don't have to worry too much about when it comes to actually planning and implementing something for decision making.
Yeah, the issue of sort of having the kind of data resources to do what you need to do, because it's something that we've definitely heard before in things like natural language processing for like low resource languages. It's like so much of the time it's not so much the data issue, it's kind of making the most of the data that you do have, that kind of thing. Um, I mean, there's just making that link there is kind of sounds like there could be lots of kind of implications for these kind of methods already. Um,
Yeah,
the
and
other,
I think similar to NLP for low resource language, I think a lot of these challenges is really a challenge of justice because right now the benefits of AI in terms of like better healthcare decisions, better recommendations, more interesting music, better like faster systems, better infrastructure, all of these kinds of advances that AI is enabling are for the most part being diverted to like very wealthy countries and very wealthy like sub communities within those countries, and it is those kinds of advances will just enable us to further broaden the gap between like the world's rich and privileged and the world's poor and low resourced. So similar to how NLP, by focusing on like how can we develop these kinds of techniques, how do we develop like assistive tools and text to speech and speech to text systems for low resource languages, so that those communities, those language speakers can actually benefit from all of the things that NLP enables. How can we also translate that to like environmental challenges and to healthcare challenges in places where we don't have a lot of access to data all the time? Really
yeah,
trying to just close this gap so that we are not just
yeah,
broadening the world's inequality.
Yeah, sort of not trying to avoid perpetuating existing imbalances as much as possible. Um, and it's so looking at kind of all these different areas, what is something that really kind of excites you about your area of work?
So, the thing that excites me about, the work that I get to do is I spend so sometimes, when I tell people that I'm doing research in computer science, they think I just spent my whole day programming, and just working on code and building systems and stuff like that, and I would say I probably spend maybe 10% of my time, like, actually working on code, and the rest of it, is spent, like, thinking and in meetings and talking to people and trying to, like, manage teams and deploy systems and mentoring undergraduates and all of that. But one thing that I'm very, very lucky to be able to do is spend a good fraction of my time thinking about challenges and talking with people who are not in computer science. So I've had several of my projects that have been working with people in the conservation world, either like from the academic side as ecologists or conservation biologists, or from the practitioner side, so working with conservation managers in protected areas in Belize and Cambodia and Uganda, and then also talking with folks at conservation NGOs such as WWF, Wildlife Conservation Society, Zoological Society of London, and being able to actually kind of learn what their world looks like, understand what their priorities are, what they think to be the most important conservation challenges, and recognize what they think that the biggest gaps are. So, do we have to focus on a specific species? How do we, what are the resources that we really need to invest more time in that we need to make sure are like the best allocated? How do we deal with all sorts of like changing like impacts as time goes by, like across seasons and stuff? And really just trying to understand how things work and understand how landscapes work. So I have like no formal background in ecology or conservation or anything like that, but it's been a real joy to be able to spend a lot of my time like reading academic papers in conservation biology. And I've also had the really good fortune of spending um, uh, a week each at two different protected areas that we've been working with. So back in 2019, I was in Cambodia at Tree Park Wildlife Sanctuary, visiting WWF there, visiting the rangers who are on the ground, and then just last month, at the beginning of August, I spent a week in Belize in Central America at Rio Bravo Conservation Management Area, and that was a real treat because this is the first protected area that we're working with in Latin America, and we got to go on three different patrols with the ranger teams there and just see like, okay, well, this is what the landscape looks like. We saw leopard tracks when we were there. We saw parrots. We saw all sorts of birds and a few monkeys and turtles and other things. But then also really just got to like see the landscape, like be immersed in, wow, this is rainy season and we were trekking through like 6 inches of
Wow.
water and mud and
Oh
stuff. So
gosh.
it's just totally the kinds of experiences that I did not expect to have as a computer scientist. And I feel very lucky to kind of be in this interdisciplinary space where not only do I get to learn about what these other areas are focused on, but I also get to be immersed in these settings um, and be able to learn from them and understand directly like, okay, well, this is what their day-to-day experiences are like, these are like the resources they have, like these are like the whole wealth of challenges that they have, that where like AI is not a solution. AI like can really not play any role. Like they need like more funding, they need better equipment, they need more training and stuff like that. But also try to, from that kind of immersive experience, understand and isolate out, well, okay, what are the things that AI could actually help with? What are the parts of this landscape where they don't really know what the illegal hunting or wildfire or poaching patterns are like? And then work as kind of like a puzzle maker trying to figure out like, okay, like where are the gaps and what is the correct piece that might fit into here that kind of works well with existing systems that I have, so that we whatever systems that we create are not a burden, but fit in nicely with their
Yeah,
needs and priorities.
yeah. That sounds like there's some really, really incredible experiences there with sort of all these different organizations and traveling around. Is there anything that's like particularly memorable? I mean, the 6 inches of rain, that's quite memorable in and of itself. But yeah, any other kind of like standout moments in your research experience so far?
That's a fantastic question. So, thinking on the well, it's just one small interesting thing that has also come out of these conversations is realizing that before we're able to like go like on the ground and see what things are like when we were first working with Trupak Wildlife Sanctuary in Cambodia and trying to understand like, okay, well, we're making these predictions of where we think like high risk areas are for poaching are in this park, and then sending those locations to the rangers, and then they would go on patrol and then come back and report to us, okay, this is like what we're finding. But then when we were first doing this, we sent them 15 different areas in the park, and then they went on patrol for a month, and then came back and then sent us their patrol data. And we looked at this and we said, "Hey, this is like interesting and cool to find things, but a lot of the areas that we sent to you, like you didn't end up patrolling at all." And then they we like pulled up a map and said, okay, well, here's, the area that we pointed to, and then here's like the area where you walked around, and they're not the same. So what's going on there? Did we send you an area that was like not good? And then the response was, oh, we tried to go there, but there was no water hole there. So when we go on this 40 long patrol and we're camping out, we like need a water access so that we can drink and cook food and bathe
Oh gosh,
and
yeah.
whatnot. And then this was just like a huge like duh moment where it really emphasizes to us like the experience that we're having like sitting at our desks, looking at digital maps of things like on this big macro scale is really not the experience of what it's like to be on the ground, and realizing that, okay, well, um these kinds of conversations are like absolutely essential for us to like do anything that is useful. But then also those are the kinds of things where like later on when we actually came to visit and like accompany them on patrol, then we realized, wow, these are actually the constraints that we have, and we're recognizing it firsthand. And similarly, we had another experience in Belize where we right now it is rainy season, so they experience very strong seasonality in like a lot of areas, like the rivers flood over, like the ground gets very waterlogged and muddy and marshy. But then during the dry season that all dries out, everything's like bone dry, you can like walk through super
Yeah.
easily and stuff. But since it is like very intense rainy season right now, we're looking, considering like, okay, like here's a place that we think like might be high risk of illegal hunting. And then we tried to go there, and we got kind of like a kilometer in from the main road, but it was just like so waterlogged, and we were like just bushwhacking everything. There was like obviously like no trail there. Nobody had been there, at least in several months. So we were recognizing, okay, well, this prediction like is not relevant right now, and it might be relevant in the dry season when seasonality really changes. But right now it is not. So we don't need to like worry about the entire park. We just need to worry about areas that are accessible, that are closer to a main road, that are like more along actual pathways and stuff like that. So just kind of these like physical constraints are just kind of like a shock every time. And then afterwards it just seems like, oh duh, like these people
Yeah.
have to sleep and drink water. These people have to like move through a space, and this is not like going on a nice hike where you can just like walk around wherever. This is like dense jungle.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like when you're building kind of models of things, there's kind of so much kind of, I guess, simplification that you have to do, and then kind of the expectation versus reality of the
Yeah.
actual place is like that's quite a big challenge, I imagine, to try and like address. Um, in terms of so that's, I mean, that's one challenge. But what else do you think could be some of the big sort of challenges and or I guess opportunities in AI?
Um, so looking more broadly, I think there's a lot of really interesting challenges in the environmental space, and then also for other kind of socially relevant, socially urgent problems. Related to things I was talking about before about, okay, how do we like take approaches that are used in these kind of like high resource, high data settings, and then translate them to be useful in all sorts of other um, very important settings. I think that in the environmental world specifically, there is a whole world of optimization and planning that is not yet being considered in um by either AI researchers or by conservationists. So in the theoretical ecology world, for example, they're starting to do or they've been doing for several decades now, planning and what they call adaptive management, looking at in computer science markup decision processes, which models how environment changes over time. So if an animal population like has 100 species 100 individuals and then a year passes and there's like no hunting, then the population will increase to like this amount. But then if there's like hunting, or if like there's a drought or something like that, then the population will decrease by this amount. And those are kind of probabilistic systems that you can model. So market decision processes have been used like in computer science for several decades, and it's awesome that that kind of modeling has been useful in ecology as well. But then in the past, in particular 10 or so years, there's been a lot of new advances that have come up in computer science from a planning perspective, using reinforcement learning so that we can model these systems like more effectively. We can account for uncertainty. We can do robust planning. A lot of these techniques have been pioneered in computer science, mostly for the robotics world. So that's another case in which we have like very high resource, very good funding, very good simulators, like a lot of like quick access to things. We can just like try something out. Like all these like Amazon warehouses and whatnot have like warehouses with like 1,000 robotic arms that are just like moving around and doing things, so you can like get new samples very quickly. But then for the environmental space, we don't have a lot of that. And I think the healthcare world, for example, has been a lot more at the forefront of taking advantage of these like new advances in computer science. So there are some faculty here at Harvard who are doing really fantastic work, Susan Murphy and Finale Dashi-Velez, in trying to bring reinforcement learning techniques to clinical healthcare decision making and figure out like, okay, well, based on whatever the patient's like cancer diagnosis is, or need for like some disease, what treatment regimen should we prescribe to them based on like their vitals, how they're responding, and stuff like that. So it is doing that kind of individualized treatment planning with like scarce data and with a lot of uncertainty, but then still using like reinforcement techniques there, and also developing new reinforcement learning techniques in like RL safety, and trying to develop interpretable machine learning that are like really custom designed for the healthcare space. And a lot of those techniques would also carry over to this environmental space, and for the kind of problems that conservation biologists and landscape ecologists are thinking about. But it just, that translation has not been done yet. The papers and like the textbooks and the talks have not been communicated across those spaces. So I really do think we just need uh, if we could get, like all the fields are kind of like boring into like the ground, like drilling in like to these great levels of depth. And what we have to do is like we have all these like tunnels that are going down, and we just have to like carve like the little like naked mole rat
Yeah.
passageway in between those tunnels, so that people can actually like go from one to another and say, okay, well, here's the problem that we have in healthcare, and here are the techniques in computer science, so let's put this together. And then these neuroscientists, have like figured this other stuff out, so like let's adapt those techniques in computer science. And then those computer science techniques go like be used by economists, that then get used by like ecologists to model predator prey interaction. So I really do think that there's been a lot of academic research is like new for the field, but not new like
Yeah.
the entire world. So I think that those are like the exciting kinds of
Yeah.
questions, and the very like feasible to do because the techniques exist. We just have to like develop the shared language and communication skills
Yeah.
to achieve it.
Yeah. This does actually kind of link um, very well actually with the question from the previous New Voice in AI. Dimitri Camillo kind of asked about how do you kind of see relationships between existing approaches in AI? So he was kind of talking about kind of symbolic AI, neural networks, embodied robotics, but things like reinforcement learning, and kind of your thoughts on whether you see them as kind of completely independent approaches in kind of competition with each other, or whether they can be brought together in ways that kind of could be quite promising and lead to new discoveries. And it sounds like you've kind of already mentioned a little bit of like this need to kind of combine things.
I completely agree, and I think that, there like, so many of the ideas that are, like, innovative in this space, are just kind of borrowing ideas and trying to figure out, like, where those connections can be drawn, and I think one thing that is a huge shame in computer science is that, there's so much new research that is being developed, like, there are thousands of papers at a single AI conference nowadays, like the Triple AI, the NeurIPS, ICML, that it's really hard to keep track of even what's new, that people spend too much time reading, like, papers that have only come out in the past 2 to 5 years, and we're missing out on all of this foundational stuff, like things that were like core ideas, foundational techniques that were developed in the 80s, in computer science and economics and psychology and all these related spheres. Um, and I think that is a huge loss, and we really should spend more time like going back to basics so that we can like develop this really strong foundation and then be more able and adept to make those connections. Because I absolutely do think that as Dimitri's pointed out, it's a lot of these techniques aren't new; they're just new to this very localized application.
Yeah, yeah, specific field. Which I guess actually this brings me on to penultimate question. What is your question for the next person in the series?
Oh, interesting. Um, I I think well, okay, so I think because the AI Hub, like, audience is a little bit more broad and perhaps not everyone is academic, I'll ask this person, what do you think is the biggest thing, or most, exciting opportunities that somebody, who is not in the academic world can get into, like, related to, like, AI research or development? So are there, like, cool labs? Are there cool, uh, other ways to just like get involved and learn about these problems and like start to delve in.
Yeah, great question. It's actually really nice to kind of consider people that aren't necessarily like in the depths of academia, and yeah, to sort of see what their recommendations are for kind of getting involved in some way. Um, yeah, and very finally, where can we find out more about your work, online or otherwise?
Yeah, I have a website, it lily x.github.io, or if you search my name, like I would probably come up somewhere soon. So I have links to like papers that I've written that are like meant for this AI audience. I also have a paper that was written with a philosophy PhD student who is now a fellow, an ethics fellow at Stanford, that's thinking more like broadly at these questions of like, okay, what does it mean to do quote unquote AI for social good? How do we take ideas from developmental economics and philosophy and like bring them in to the AI community we where that helps us decide which problems to work on and how to actually go about like designing and deploying an effective system. And then there are also a few other like general audience pieces, including an AI Hub interview with Lucy from a few months ago.
Yeah. Um, as always, we will have links to all of that down somewhere on the page. But yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us and yeah, sharing your amazing work with us.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's been really fun chatting with you, and I'm very honored to be involved in this.
And very finally, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to find out more about anything mentioned or more about the series, do join us on AIhub.org. And until next time, goodbye for now.